like I said, we both went to Kutztown. You're still currently there.
Yep.
What made you decide that you wanted to get involved in media?
So, I mean, I had always heard a lot, when you're younger, how people don't really know what they want to do when they're older, and they change it and they change their major, which is totally fine. But my freshman year of high school, I took a journalism and mass media class. And the teacher of that class ended up becoming my mentor for my entire tenure in high school. But at the end of that class, we had a final project that I think it had to be a video, or maybe you had an option, I don't really remember. So I'd written a script, horrible script.
As all our first scripts are.
I'd written a script, I got a little cast together, didn't get a crew. I was my one-person crew.
Again, as all first projects are.
with no audio, just my sister's old DSLR. It was the original Canon Rebel. And I recorded it, and I went in and I edited it, and I had such a good time doing it that I started to think that maybe that's what I had wanted to do. But back then I was quite timid and quite shy, didn't talk a lot, the thought of being around a camera made me shake. So it was something that I was like, this is never really gonna come to fruition. So my high school had a news program that was a class, and I had decided to just do it and just rip the Band-Aid off and go ahead and do it. And every morning, each person would have kind of like rotating positions of like the floor manager and like the assistant director, and you could be the talent and everything. And eventually I did get on camera and got over it, but I really learned how much I loved working behind the camera, and I had just decided that was 100% what I wanted to do. And I'd heard so much about Kutztown's film program, and I kind of like, as soon as I was accepted there, I just went straight for it. I applied to other places, but I knew that it's just what I wanted to do, and I don't regret it.
Yeah, that's funny, because that's kind of mirrors my background a little bit. I was sort of the same way, where I figured out, a friend of mine showed me YouTube back in, I want to say maybe like 7th or 8th grade, and I started watching stuff like The Angry Video Game Nerd or The Nostalgia Critic, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do, because I knew that I wanted to be like in some sort of creative field. I would draw a lot, I would write a lot, but then when I saw like how accessible stuff like YouTube and content creation was, I was like, oh man, that's something that I could do. So like you said, it's a lot of like just low budget, like no audio equipment and no lighting equipment, just one camera with your like friends after school, and that's always the start of something special.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was plenty of times once I did end up getting into it where I don't know where those videos are now, but like we did a parody of like the Blair Witch, and it was so stupid.
No.
It was so stupid, and it's just so funny to look back on now when you're using all of this equipment that we're surrounded by right now.
Right.
Whereas like if you did something like this when you were like 15, it would just be like, we're just going to record this on my phone and hope for the best.
Yeah, and it's almost weird how it's like come like, like full circle in a way, where now you have like big productions that are just made on iPhones. So it's almost like, what was all that work for? But yeah, it's it's always like, it's just such a unique way to like figure out this is what I want to do, and like develop that over the years. And you touched on the one thing I like what you said is that we look back on those things that we've made and we're like, oh, that's so terrible. But like, imagine what we're gonna think like 10 years from now, like looking back on what we're doing in this moment, like that's gonna be such a surreal thing. Like Steven Spielberg probably hates Jaws. Like,
I'm sure.
like that's such like, it's a weird thing to think about, but it's just like that weird kind of perspective that you get with time.
Especially because you're always your own critic, and you want to look back and you're like, I could have done this better, but in the moment, that was where your skill set is, and you can really do nothing but grow and learn more.
Right. Yeah, it's like that quote with Ira Glass said, where it's like, when you're starting out in anything creative, this is like the third time I've mentioned this quote on the podcast, but it's like, anytime that you are doing anything creative, you have a threshold for what you think is quality, no matter what you're doing, whether it's like writing a song or painting or making movies, and you're never ever going to be able to meet that threshold in your own eyes, especially starting out. So it's important to realize that you're going to have limitations and that you have to keep on building to get where you want to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So, sort of going off of that, let's talk. So we talked a little bit before the show. We were looking at my huge movie collection that's off screen. What are some of your favorite movies or movies that have really inspired you?
Oh boy! All right.
To like shape you into the filmmaker you are today.
So I mean, one of my top movies has always been Jurassic Park, which I mean, have you met a film major? I feel like it's always exactly. Up there for them. Mm-hmm. But I'm a big fan of. I promise I have movies that aren't all blockbusters, but I'm a big fan of Kill Bill. Mm. Huge fan. I was just watching it the other day, and I'm also a big fan of Pulp Fiction. But besides those, man, that's tough. I have quite an interesting list of movies. I mean, this isn't, the typical movie, but I'm actually a huge fan of animated movies as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of How to Train Your Dragon, actually. Okay. I think all three of them, I just think they do a great job at narrative storytelling and everything. Mm-hmm. But, sorry, I'm, looking at my letterbox, trying to get some ideas.
By all means, yeah.
But I'm a big fan of... I mean, I told you right before we started that I recently got into Star Wars. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if they'd be one of my favorite movies, but they're some of the favorite movies for me to watch, kind of in my... kind of like that background noise kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the John Wick movies.
Okay, yeah. Those are good.
Went and saw the newest one in theaters, really good. It's so tough. I have quite a few, and it's... you know what? I can give you my all-time favorite movie. Okay. It's Fight Club.
All right, yeah. That's a good one. That's a good pick.
One of my all-time favorite movies. But I have a couple that are a little bit more... Maybe not the usual quality, we'll say, mm-hmm. is I love Dazed and Confused. Okay. That's a kind of a nostalgic movie for me. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of Donnie Darko. I have to admit I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter series. I mean, I came in here with a Harry Potter scarf on, so I can't even deny that.
Okay, yeah.
But I love Living in Oblivion. That's always...
I haven't heard of that one.
It's a Steve Buscemi movie, actually. He's the main character. It's from 1995, and it's actually...
Oh, is that the one where he's like
making a movie?
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I have heard. I haven't seen that, but
good one.
I know what that one is.
I definitely recommend it.
I'll have to check that one out someday.
And then I'm gonna finish it off with Buffalo 66.
Okay. I don't think I know that one either. What's that one about?
So that one it's a Vincent Gallo movie. And man, that's hard to explain.
That's always a good sign when you're like, oh man, it's really hard to explain why I like this one. It's a sign that it's great.
It has Christina Ricci in it. It's about this man that he has always essentially disappointed his parents. Mm-hmm. Not even they just don't like him really, and mm-hmm. he kidnaps a woman to try and kind of make up for his sad life.
Okay.
And he tries to kind of... it's so hard to explain. It's very interesting. I don't want to call it a psychological movie. It's just that when you watch it, it's watching this man's insanity make so much sense to him, mm-hmm. but not to the viewer.
Right.
It was shot entirely on film, and it has one of the most insane scenes to ever be used with film. I would definitely recommend it. It's actually one of Professor Johnston's favorite movies. Okay. If that gives you any inkling.
I definitely got a lot of my, not like top 10 favorites, but that class masterpieces in film history. I got a lot of really good recommendations out of that class. He'd be fun to have on this show. I might have to reach out to him. So it's interesting. You touched a little bit on like there's movies that you hold that there's no question about it. Like definitely. Like top 10, top 5, whatever, but there's also those movies that kind of are more like loosey-goosey where you really, really like them, but they're not like they're not your go-tos. I think that favorite movies oftentimes fall on a scale of like objectivity versus subjectivity, where you can say like objectively Star Wars, it tells a coherent story from A to B and it's entertaining, but it doesn't really necessarily have a lot of those aspects that make like your favorite movie. You know what I mean? Like Fight Club, I think, is a very subjectively very entertaining movie, but it also way further excels at what it's trying to do than like your Star Wars or your Jurassic Park, where like the main point is to be entertaining.
For sure. I mean, yeah, I would clump those like Harry Potter and Star Wars together for me, because I mean, I can't even necessarily call them nostalgic movies because I got into both of those at a pretty late age, excuse me.
Right.
But like when it comes to like, I'm a person that's very into the lore of series, like learning about things that they don't necessarily talk about in the movies, and Harry Potter and Star Wars are the perfect explanation for that, because you'll never know every single thing about them, and that's probably why I say like, oh, like I'll put them up there. They're not my favorite in terms of narrative per se, but they keep my interest. They're I don't want to call them a classic, but they're just that classic. You can put them on in the background, kind of movie, but they're nonetheless good, because I don't necessarily want to say that for a movie to be amazing, it has to be narrative driven. It really doesn't have to be necessarily.
I think we're definitely locked into this idea that like movies are a certain way from A to B, and like you kind of have to be very strict about what you do with them to make like a coherent, like digestible product for audiences. But there's so many unique ways that you can use an hour and a half of film to really tell something compelling or show something to the audience to like make them think. So it's always those movies definitely have their place, but it's always good to experience something like new. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
there's definitely movies that are maybe more for fun. I want to say. I mean, like I mentioned, the John Wick movies. I don't necessarily want to say, there's nothing amazingly special about those movies. They're kind of just fun movies for me. Like, they're just a fun escape to watch Keanu Reeves kill people. And I don't think that every movie needs to be like a big blockbuster or like amazingly written to be just a fun movie to watch. Because I mean, when it comes down to it, when you look at movies, they've always been considered like an escape for people.
Yeah.
So you don't need a Fight Club to have a good movie.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take away from either one of them. Like, it doesn't take away from Fight Club being an amazing narrative-driven movie, and it doesn't take away from Star Wars being this fun space movie that does have narrative and plot to it.
So, yeah, kind of going off of that first point of, like, that we both went to the same program at college, and we both kind of aspired to be filmmakers. Who are some of your inspirations, or like anyone from like a director, writer, editor, cinematographer, whatever, like anyone that you kind of look at and are like, oh, that's an example of what I want to do? Yeah,
so I mean, I'm a big fan of Ted Hope. He was the producer of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Okay.
He has a book called Hope for Film that Professor Johnson recommended me and let me borrow from him, and I learned quite a bit from him in that book. So I look up to him as someone who, not that I necessarily watch a lot of the movies he's produced, but that learning his background and the work that he puts in and how much he cares about producing films for people rather than, there's that stereotype of what a producer is.
Right.
So he was a big impact on when I started getting into potentially wanting to be a producer in the future. And then this one's a little bit surprising, but I'm actually a big fan of the special effects makeup teams in many movies. And
it's such an not like underappreciated, but it definitely doesn't, unless you're like Weta or like Stan Winston Studios, you don't get nearly the amount of attention you deserve.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I had started kind of doing a lot of special effects makeup for student films while I've been at Kutztown, because I was one of the only people that know how to do it. So I ended up having a huge appreciation for a lot of pretty much, like, I don't necessarily want to say there's no one in specific, because the makeup team for Guillermo del Toro movies are always amazing. I wouldn't even know where to start with the names, because I think that they're all amazing, but I kind of want to give that shout out to makeup artist teams, because they did inspire me to kind of end up getting more into film and understanding, like, that aspect. I mean, like, I did makeup for one of the professor's films a couple years ago, and I had to learn, how to do makeup for a 4K camera, because it's not how you'd...
Every single pore
Yep.
right up in front of your face, yeah.
And that one's a little bit of an interesting one, since I don't necessarily want to go in that direction anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But, I do want to give, the attention to the usual, like Quentin Tarantino kind of thing, because solely because they did pave a way for a lot of filmmakers, and a lot of them did start out indie.
Right.
But I would say that Ted Hope is one of the bigger people for me, just knowing so much about him now.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, it's really tough. I'm a big fan of, he was a cinematographer for Kill Bill. Let me see here.
I think I might know who you're talking about, but I can't remember the name.
It's Robert Richardson.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of him because, like I mentioned, he's usually Quentin Tarantino's cinematographer. He was a cinematographer for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just said Kill Bill just because I love the cinematography in the movie.
Definitely, yeah. It's one of the craziest movies from
sure.
at least from a blocking. Like, if you're only looking at the what's it called, the Battle at the House of Blue Leaves, like, just from that.
Yeah, and that's the movie
alone.
I have in my head when I think of him. Is that
right.
whole scene
Mm-hmm.
is just insane. I have to give a lot of appreciation for cinematographers, because as much as they're appreciated when you're in the film industry, I feel like everyone forgets about them. I have
mm-hmm.
a lot of appreciation for... I know it's not specific people, so I'm sorry. It's not exactly
it's okay.
what you were asking,
okay.
but I have a lot of appreciation for the roles that don't get a lot of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an assistant director myself, and no one ever remembers what no one thinks an assistant director does anything in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have a lot of appreciation for those roles that kind of just get stepped over, whereas everyone's like the director.
Mm-hmm. That's always the number one. Actors are probably number one, and then it's a director, and then those are the only people who made that movie.
Yep.
Do you have any examples of, because you really touched on like special effects and cinematography, are there any like movies that you think are like really excel in those areas but don't really get the respect that they deserve off the top of your head?
I want to say, this one, there was a time period, I feel like, and again, it's also hard looking at this from, being in the film industry perspective, because, you have your friends that are all movie buffs, so
mm-hmm.
in your mind, it doesn't exactly coincide, but I think Pan's Labyrinth excels so much in makeup, and there was a time period where it, of course, did get a lot of attention that it
right.
deserved, but that falls into one of those categories of, I bring that movie up to people, and they're like, well, if it's not dubbed, I don't want to watch it.
Yeah, I hate that so much.
Yeah, and it's so worth watching. Like,
mm-hmm.
the subtitles don't take away from it at all. It adds to it because that's what it was meant to be in.
Exactly. We kind of touched on this in the last episode. Our recommendations were Bong Joon-ho's Parasite and then Park Chan-wook's Oldboy. And it's just, it frustrates me so much that you have these amazing movies that nobody is going to watch because they have to pay that just little extra bit of attention. I can't get over that.
Yeah, I've been seeing it all over the place of people asking, like, Amazon and stuff for returns on their rental for Parasite because they don't want to read it and it doesn't come in, like, a dubbed version.
Right.
And it's, we're past the Oscars now. We know that it won,
mm-hmm.
and that's amazing. But it's still disheartening to know that it's still not getting the appreciation it deserves solely because it's a foreign film, essentially.
Yeah.
And I actually haven't gotten to see it yet. I'm actually watching it this week. I'm watching it this upcoming Thursday.
An amazing experience.
I have it. I just haven't actually gotten to watch it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited to watch it. And before I was here, I was talking to a bunch of people, and they all said that it was the best movie of 2019. And our praise for that movie aside, though.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Pan's Labyrinth is definitely the movie that I first think of when I think about special effects makeup like that. Prosthetics are an insanely hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that whole movie is, basically. And when it comes to cinematography, I mean, the film Mandy's cinematography is amazing.
Right.
For me, I mean, bringing up Kill Bill and Mandy, I mean, you can see what I think cinematography is amazing. Mm-hmm. There's definitely cinematography besides that that's also amazing. I think The Lighthouse was amazing.
Yes, definitely. It really bummed me out that was the only category that it was nominated for, and I was so rooting for it to get that. I don't even remember. Do you remember who got the cinematography award? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
But I know. Point being, it wasn't The Lighthouse, and that made me very mad.
No, yeah, and it had upset me a lot that that's like you said, it was the only thing it was nominated for, whereas there was like 1917 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Actually, no, that's what it was. It was 1917. Yeah.
And not that those movies aren't deserving of awards, but they got so many nominations, and The Lighthouse was definitely snubbed when it comes to that. And, we've had this conversation before.
Yeah.
But there's just so many scenes in that movie that it almost looks like there wasn't a way for the cinematographer to just get that. It looks edited. Of course it was, but more than it, you know what I mean? It's just that movie is absolutely insane to me.
It's definitely one of those cases where they it's not just like in the case of 1917, like the one shot aspect is very impressive, but that's kind of really all that movie has going for it. Whereas you have, like, with The Lighthouse, the really strict aspect ratio and the really harsh lighting and the very specific brand of film that they were shooting on to get the different exposures that they were getting. Like, it was very clear that was meant to be a part of the experience, and it's just one of those things where, like, the more you think about it, the more
the better it gets.
Yeah, the better
honestly.
it gets.
The more impressive it gets.